white such a unique thing? Why is it such an important thing? I've never felt that way.
It is kind of a unique thing, you know.
Well, it must be. You're telling me that being white is special, and I'm not feeling special. And I've never felt special because I was white. You've pointed out to me where, yeah, I have racial prejudices, and I've expressed them innocently and naively by just little questions and statements that I've made. Yeah, maybe I really am that way.
I have a real difficult time talking with you about your experience. I can relate to their frustration. It just doesn't feel like anything's getting through.
Working up my courage to ask you something, a request. And also there's a question with it. The request is for you to not give up on David, to go after him. I'm not able to get through, and many in the room are not able to get through. And we've given statistics, and we've given personal stories, and we've given histories, and we've yelled, we've screamed, we've cried. You know, it's not getting through. I'm sure you've met other white people that you just have said, bye, forget it, I don't need to deal with you, you know, that kind of thing. I don't have the privilege of not dealing with the Davids in the world. So I'm asking you to do that. I'm actually boldly expecting you to do that. If I were standing in front of a whole room full of white people, I would tell them much of what I've told some of the men in this group this weekend, the white men in this group. I would tell them that it's their responsibility to go educate their white brothers and sisters. I would tell them that it's my expectation. I expect them to eliminate racism. I expect them to go out and intervene whenever they see racism going on. And I expect them to be as outraged about racism as I am outraged about racism, as black people are outraged, as Asians are outraged, as Indians are outraged. I expect that of them, and that's what I would tell them. I would tell them what I expect. I'll tell them what I'd tell them what I never want to hear from them again. I never want to hear stuff about my experience is not valid, or why can't I just pull myself up by my bootstraps. Those are things that I would tell them about. And I'd tell them that they've got to end it. They've got to end it.
3 weeks I have performed my...
This morning, I felt this ray of hope and optimism, and you shared that you get nervous when you would go down to San Francisco into a ethnically diverse neighborhood, and that you actually got in touch with those messages, whether they were given to you directly, taught you directly or not, or somehow that you felt how these things just started to come over you.
Why was that important to you, Tommy?
Because I just sort of felt that you finally connected with some feelings, and getting down here instead of being up here in the frontal lobes and analyzing everything and looking at everything rational. Because a lot of the fears or the anger isn't rational.
It's probably the looks that you get. I think that's where it comes from, the looks of the individuals. They stand on the corners and, what are you doing here, you know? And they make me feel unwanted. I think that's what I feel.
Yeah. That's what pickup trucks do, and guys with cowboys just sitting there, you pull up in the gas station.
Yeah. I know my feelings are very opposed to some of yours, and I don't understand why you have all this intense anger and emotions, why it's so difficult for you to just be yourselves and make your place. I think that's the big difference here. We white men don't have this camaraderie, if you want, that you coloreds have. We have, well, we don't go out and organize. We don't go out and have discussions. We just do our stuff, whatever our stuff is, I guess.
I see that we're living in two completely different consciousnesses. And, you know, and I think that I get yours and that I have to be able to understand yours in order to survive. You live in a world where it's not necessary in most instances for you to understand my consciousness and my experience. It's like one of those parking garages with the spikes coming up. You know, you live in the world where when you drive your car past, the spikes lay down. And I live in the world, and the men of color here live in a world where when we come up to the spikes, man, they're facing right at us.
The thought comes to me, Victor, you're going the wrong direction. If the spikes are opposing you, does that ever occur to you that you're going the wrong direction?
That's a beautiful statement to me, that I'm going the wrong direction. It's a marvelous illustration of the consciousness of white supremacy.
Well, let's not say white supremacy.
That's
just
what I want
say
to say.
This is where, as you speak this analogy, and I'm thinking to myself, golly, why does it always have to be in opposition to the way things are structured? And I constantly sit here and think, why is he taking this direction? Why don't they as a group, why don't you with your people look for something within yourselves that can make you feel equal to us? Because what I hear is you are not equal. And I do not feel that.
So what's keeping you from believing that that's happening to Victor? Just believing, not to know why that's happening to him, but what's keeping you from believing that that's
Because
happening
it
to
seems
Victor?
like such a harsh life. And I just don't want to believe. I would assume, Victor, that your life is really that hard, difficult, and unpleasant.
What would it mean, David, then, if the life really was that harsh? What would that mean in your life? If it really was
Well, that'd
that
be a
harsh?
travesty of life. You have here something that shouldn't exist.
And so what if it does? What if the world were not as you thought, that it actually is happening to lots of human beings on this earth? What if it actually were, and you didn't know about it? What would that mean to you?
Oh, that's very saddening. You don't want to believe that man can be so cruel to himself or his own kind. I do not want to accept that it has to be that way, or maybe it is. And it must be because you express it and the others in the group express that it is.
From here, I can work with you.
I do not find you to be an enemy. Aggressive and frightening when you become very animated and agitated. But
We spend a lot of time being nice and conciliatory and thoughtful and careful. I don't want to be excitable with you about it. I become excitable when I feel like there's no way for my humanity to get affirmed. If I can't say no with my whole aliveness to being mistreated or invalidated, then I'm dead. I'm as good as dead.
if there were some way that I could be of use and service to you, I would. I don't know how. I've never looked at that possibility.
I think how you could help me is to begin to understand yourself better. I don't need help from you or from white folks as much as I need a sense of fairness, which is lacking, and as much as I need a sense of awareness about this invisible protection that you have and this invisible privilege that you have.
When Victor was telling you about you being asleep, not being conscious of your privilege and taking it for granted, it was revealed to me that that is true when you refer to us as you coloreds, because I find that is a very demeaning term. I find it alienating, and I've heard it in the context of referring to people of color in a negative fashion, and it's painful for me to hear it.
How would you like me to address you?
Well, not as you anything, not you people, not you coloreds, not you Asians, not you blacks, not you Latinos.
You,
Just
David.
people of color, or David, if you want to mention, talk about like non-whites, or I'm more comfortable with that. Because when you say you, it's sort of, it's alienating. You bastards, you pigs, you lowlifes, you no good people, you people of color. That's how it feels.
And, I know I have talked to black people who have said, you have immigrants that come to this country and they can't speak a word of the language except for one thing. They can all say nigger. Racism between whites and people of color isn't the only racism that exists. There's racism amongst people of color.
It was dusk, it was just dark. This whole group of black people there going home, and I had this anxiety, this tension there. And I said, why am I so, what's this big deal? And then I started to relax, and I said, these people are just going home from work. Just like me. They're all waiting at the bus stop. And as soon as I opened my eyes and scanned instead of and released myself from all this fear, but it still comes up. I get frightened. You guys are powerful. You guys got a lot of power.
Certain Asian people have reacted toward me, and that really hurt me because I felt they took their cues from white people. Like I've walked by Asian women, and you can see them tense up. And that really bothered me, that here was somebody who was another minority, and yet they had all these, they treated me in a way that they wouldn't want to be treated. It was like they were treating me like some kind of thug off the street, and I really hated that.
The table behind us were two young black women, and they were laughing and then looking over at my table where I was sitting, and I heard one say, "All Chinese look alike." I got up and I walked over to them, and they just wouldn't look at me. They kept on kind of giggling and not looking at me. I said, I heard what you said, and I disagree with that. Do you think all blacks look alike?
And I came back to my car, and there was a motorcycle parked in front of it. And I looked around, and there was a black man in a motorcycle helmet getting money out of the money machine. And I was pissed. And I walked up to him, and I said, your bike's blocking my way. I mean, he just turned around and kind of looked at me, had his helmet on, and he opened his visor, and he said, "I'm busy. I'll get to it in a minute." Sort of telling me, I've got the power. You don't. I felt like it was misplaced rage. Yeah. I felt like it was focused on me, but it was misplaced rage, And I'm afraid of that. I run into it every once in a while, and I'm afraid. And I think that I read the media, watch television, read the newspapers, and all I get is this reinforcement. All I get is this reinforcement about these negative stereotypes. And it takes a real effort to sort of combat this.
I am reluctant and fearful of further division between us, and worried that division between us will happen even more, where we won't come back together. That's something that runs deep with me. That stops me from looking at areas that get hard when it comes to other people of color.
I have been a little bit nervous about getting into this and not wanting to have us, just lay our junk out on the table without, acknowledging that that there's a context of white racism that we live within that helps to separate us and confuse us about each other.
And I do agree that you have to look at interethnic racism within the context of white supremacy, but I disagree with the fact that you can't cover that up because it is there and we have to deal with it before we can do anything about white racism. We have to deal with that conflict because it's there, and in my opinion it's growing. By exploring interethnic racism, we've torn apart the unity that we built up earlier when we were just attacking white people.
Okay, I have to
And
take
I wonder
exception
if
with the bit about attacking white people. I think attacking white racism.
Okay.
It's not. I don't think it's about attacking white people.
There is some anger, underlying real anger, and we're afraid to express it because we want to, as Victor said, maintain some kind of unity here that we've established. Maybe we should take the risk and lay it all out.
I mean, talking about it helps. Bringing it out into the light helps. It loses some of its mystery, some of its power.
Growing up, I picked up stereotypes that blacks were lazy, that they were violent, that they were dangerous. I mean, there is a tape in the back of my head that plays back all the time. But there's another tape that I've developed and also that says, this isn't true.
When I see Asian people being praised for intelligence and black people invalidated for being stupid, I feel bitter about it. You know, because I know I'm very smart. I've always been very smart. And, you know, and it hurts me to see that acknowledgement given up to other people when it's taken away from me. And all the people in my community, with very few exceptions, where I grew up, worked very, very hard. My mother worked hard. My grandmother worked hard. My aunts and uncles worked hard. They worked themselves to death. And they pulled on their bootstraps, and those suckers just tore off, and they didn't get no place.
You leave home every day, your parents instill at you that you're a good person, you know, you're a moral person. Yet when you go out into the world, you know, just because of the color of your skin, people avoid you. They look at you as if you're a potential killer. They don't think you're as smart as they are. You watch the news. Who do you see being taken away in handcuffs all the time? It's somebody that looks like you, somebody that could be you. You're always under suspicion, so at times you do wonder if it is you.
In my father's restaurant, it was, you know, make sure we don't have blacks come into our restaurant because it'll mean that white people won't come into our restaurant. And, you know, and Asian, and, white people don't want, blacks in the restaurant. But all that time, the whites were really encouraging that without knowing it. And that's why when I hear about the black and the Asian community, I feel so sad about that because I think that there's a way to which we've been really used to put down black people. You know, especially in the LA riots, you know, the poor little Korean grocer. If only the blacks could work as hard as us with such great family values, you know, look what they get. Then the black people beat them up, burn down their stores. You know, and fact of it was, we were both being exploited. We've been both taught to be really scared of each other. And it hits me here, you know, because, I mean, many of you know because my mother was murdered by an African-American man. And I can be just as angry and buy into my father's stereotypes about African-American men. But I knew where he was headed with that. I knew where he was headed. That all African-American men murder and kill. And he wanted me to pass that on to my child. But I know the stories he told me about the racism that's happened to us. And somehow I just want to say, remember what happened to us. Just remember what happened to us happens to everybody else. And I know he wanted somebody to stop that. He wanted another Asian man to stand up for him. He wanted another black man to stand up for him. And maybe another white man to stand up for him.
I have had a fair number of experiences of being or feeling invisible from black to Latino, where essentially I've been given the message that my issues as a brown person are not as important or as bad as a black person's because of the lighter, I'm whiter, you know. So somehow the measuring of the color line, you're either black or you're white. And if you're in the middle there, then it doesn't count. Like I watch out to see, all right, now which one are you going to be? The one that values my experience, or the one that says the only thing we need to do is pay attention to what happens to black people? You know, so when I meet you, that's the kind of thing that goes through. Okay, now which one are you going to be? Which one are you going to, you know, that's the tape that goes on.
You mentioned the skin color, and I think if you go back to when we were slaved or enslaved in this country, the lighter-skinned slaves were the house slaves, and they usually had more privilege. Now you bring that into the 20th century, and a lot of black people may equate lighter skin with more privilege, and that's why they don't see that you would have the problem that we would have.
You were talking about skin color within the black community. Within the Latino community, there is skin color also.
What about Asian?
Asians too.
Mhm.
Definitely
And the
Asians.
darker you are, the kind of lower you are on the scale. And like mothers, when they have a baby and the baby's white, oh, que blanco, or whatever, how beautiful, you know. Mira, casi es rubio, you know.
he's blonde.
And he's almost blonde, you know.
You know, I know that many black folks resent any signs of assimilation, whether it be amongst other people in the black community or in other ethnic communities. You know, and some of it's the skin color stuff, whether you're in the black community or other people of color communities. If you're lighter, there's less trust often, and more like, well, you might use that light skin that you have to get more goodies out of white folks. My experience has been that white folks tend to feel more at ease with people that are closer to the color that they are. You know, and that I get to do stuff that my mom can't do. My mom's significantly darker than I am. I have had an easier time putting white folks at ease, you know, because I'm not Lauren's complexion. And that can create static between me and Lauren, because
But I get the impression sometimes from the African American community that Asians are perceived as privileged, that educationally we've achieved, economically we've achieved. We're almost like white people, damn it. And therefore we're hated just, I mean,
What you can do, and maybe I'm putting too much pressure on you, but I think what you can do is make people understand how you achieved what you achieved. You know, show them how you worked hard for it, that you weren't given anything.
Again, I want to dispel the myth that all Asians have made it economically, because, you know, that's not the truth. But the ones that do are very visible.
I was just thinking the model minority,
The model
you know,
minority, right?
and it's what a setup. You know, it's like, oh, why can't you people be more like those people?
Right.
And then you wouldn't have
That's
the
a
problems that you have.
I think we are comparing each other based on white people. We're not white enough, and therefore we chastise or criticize each other for not being like the white model. I think that's why I call it internalized racism, because I don't think that I, in a vacuum, am racist against blacks, but because I come from a white context, that blacks are not like whites, and therefore I should be against blacks. Or Asians are not like whites, therefore I criticize Asians for not being like whites.
I was wanting to think that I was white. I was wanting to blend in. I was just wanting to assimilate to this extreme degree until I realized who I really wanted to be. And I looked back, and my family's internment in the concentration camps had a huge impact on that. They didn't want to identify with being Japanese, because when they said they were Japanese, they were discriminated against severely and locked up. They didn't want to identify as being Buddhist anymore. So my grandfather became Christian to blend in. He lost his real religion. And just now I'm starting to reclaim that. My dad taught me a lot of lessons. Family jokes about him being the Archie Bunker of the family. You know, And Chinese are like loud and noisy businessmen that try to take your money or something like that.
Several of my family members do not like Japanese. I think a lot of the older ones especially still remember the Sino-Japanese War, in which Japan invaded China and pretty much brutalized a lot of people.
Atrocities.
Yeah, and a lot of them remember that, and that continues. I think they perceive the Japanese as arrogant, distrustful, extremely violent, and repressed.
A lot of so much of that's true too. That's the hard thing to deny.
But it's not true for a lot of
Right, for
Japanese
us sitting
people.
right here.
right?
The number of times where I have not intervened on your behalf or on your behalf, even on your behalf, for my own people, you know, where racism has flown and I've let it fly about black people, about Asians, about other Latinos even, about Indians. And I think I have a lot of shame about that. And so if I expose that, what are you going to think of me now? You know, that kind of stuff is part of what makes this heavy for me. A woman was talking about, oh, those Cubans are taking over Florida. You know, just running with it. And I sat there, and I didn't say anything. And finally she said, Hugh, I want to ask you something. I hope you know I wasn't wanting to offend you. And all of the things that I wanted to say, I sat on. You know, I sat on it. That's an example to me of being shameful and embarrassed of not coming to intervene on your behalf or on my behalf, for that matter.
I understand you. Earlier in my life, I was totally surrounded by white people. And that was my life. Aside from my family, there was all white people around me. And every once in a while, I'd hear a comment like that, or something like that, about Cubans or Mexicans or whatever. Oh, but Roberto, you're not like that. I mean, I wasn't even Roberto then, I was Bob or something. Oh, Bob, you know, but you're not like that.
When you share that you don't take up for black people sometimes, I feel some disappointment, but it's very small. It's very small. And I can appreciate that it's difficult. Because, you know, I don't always take up for me or other people of color also. And in fact, sometimes I'm the perpetrator. It feels very strange to me to have white men bearing witness to this conversation. And that feels real vulnerable to me. First of all, to share the sort of tender parts of the hurts of racism or internalized racism, the way we play it out amongst ourselves as people of color, I feel like I want a higher level of trust between me and you or me and you before I do that. And I'm really fearful that you'll listen and nod your heads and say, uh-huh, they're just as racist as we are. I want to hear your best reassurance that you will not misuse this information.
You think maybe I would take this information and use it to incite racism? Not so it's unfounded fear, Victor.
With all due respect, I want to affirm that my fear is not unfounded. It's based on personal and collective history.
Experience with others.
And while it may or may not bear out in my relationship or our relationships with you, its foundation is sound as the raising and setting of the sun. And it feels really invalidating to hear you continually evaluating my experience or the experience of other men of color in terms of whether it's founded or not. The foundation might not be visible to you.
The only
but that doesn't mean there
relationship that you and I have is what we have in these encounters. We didn't know each other before then. And I do not like you grouping me with all those with whom you have had experience. That's disturbing because perhaps I'm a little different being from up here. Removed from the cities where you live. I feel for you people.
That answered my question.
I do, and I don't know how to really portray that, except to say that I feel the hurt that you're experiencing. And I understand the distrust you have of white men. And it's interesting to me to see that that distrust also exists between people of all colors.
It's not the same, though. Because what we do to each other pushes us down and lifts you up. And what you do to us, or what white folks do to us, pushes us down and pushes you up. It's not the same. And my fear is that if we talked about it, that you would say it's the same.
I'm going to
Yeah.
do something that
Yeah.
we haven't done today
Okay.
at all. Roberto, would you trade places with Gordon?
Yes. That was fast. I was ready for that.
What a person of color, Latino, does with a black man, or any of that, doesn't seem any bit the same to me. And I don't even term it racism.
What is the difference?
A lot. They have little or no power. I'm not big on politics and understanding that whole thing, but it's to me it's a system that we consciously and unconsciously use to keep people of color down.
I understand the problem that people of color have with the white race. And when we're talking here about a man of one color offending or giving difficulties to a man of another color, I look at that as I am a color, they are a color, each one is a color. It's the same, man to man. Why is it different when it's one color to another than white to a color?
Because you're
Because I
on
got
top.
the power.
But we're on top.
I got the privilege.
Yeah, I hear you tell me all the time for many hours now that white is on top, and I believe you. And I believe that you have that feeling. I have never had that concept that white is on top, that I am on top.
Look at the CEOs of the companies that run this world.
I agree with that.
They're all white men.
I know that.
So do you think they're going to think about me or Hugh?
For me,
No, wait a minute. Me or Hugh or David when they make a decision?
no, they're cutthroat. They think nothing of
They-
people, really.
But their decisions will most hurt people who look like us, not people who look like you. When we fight each other, when we don't take up for each other, that hurts us a lot more than it hurts you. And I never realized that until I sat here and just sat back and listened to what Victor was saying and then your response to it. But now it scares the shit out of me to even continue this conversation in this vein. Because, you know, I'm going to multiply you by, let's be nice and say the 20 million, the 50 million who will see this film and think, why should we change? These rats can't get along with each other.
Talk about it.
I'm getting seriously depressed sitting here. You know, I was thinking we were making progress, and I just don't feel like we're making much progress anymore.
How's that feel?
Feels like shit. You know, I'm ready to go outside and run my head through a wall.
What do you need from us? From me or from the other men here?
Just to know that we're all still unified, that we're all still working toward the same thing. But, Roberto, you were going to say something.
I was just going to ask David, you seem to be unaware of the statistics and the news stories that come through the general media would tell you that a black man and a white man laid off from a corporation, that the white man's going to be rehired before the black man.
I'm aware of reports like that, yes.
You are. What happens when you hear them? Do you dismiss them, or do you think they're incorrect, or?
If I were in a position to hire, I'd hire the best man available.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do, and it wouldn't matter to me what color he is. Among the whites, of my peers at any rate, my colleagues, my acquaintances, we are becoming more and more alarmed at the tendency or the trends to seek out and hire ethnic groups over the white, and that is disturbing to us in some ways.
It should be.
And it is. I have 5 daughters, and they apply to different schools. The minority races are many times given added points that give them a boost above the total points of the white race. So, you know, it's not just that it's all against you. There is much against us also.
I am disturbed that anybody is not getting into college, including white women, including white men. I'm disturbed that white men are out of jobs. However, what I get back most is pointing the finger at the people of color and the women for taking the jobs and not at the corporate heads that are sending the factories to Mexico, to Indonesia, et cetera, to make more money.
And I want to just kind of just play a devil's advocate here, and that is, what if I had said to you, well, that's just a few folks, and that's not been my experience. I think your kids should just try a little harder. I think your girls should just, you know, get those 3 or 4 more points. I mean, it's just kind of isolated. Everybody gets a chance in America to get an education. How would you feel if I say that to you, given some of the disturbance you were feeling?
That would be minimizing my feelings.
Does it make it feel like it's real anymore?
You hear me, but you don't want to put much importance on it, yeah.
Yeah. And then what you might end up doing is trying to defend that it actually does exist, huh?
We might do that, you bet.
You bet, yeah. Just like the men in this room have been doing with you today.
Sure.
One story after another, trying to tell you it's real. You might even call in some of your friends to prove that it happened, maybe even show some documents. That's what I'm talking about. That's been happening.
I have allowed myself to